A long-time term of description for what the United States does with the mentally ill is warehousing, out of sight and out of mind. But as we emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic, we can no longer ignore the issue because mental illness is now pervading all walks of life.
He was very heavily armed. He had tactical gear. He had a tactical helmet on. He had a camera that he was live streaming what he was doing.
At one extreme, Buffalo mass murderer Peyton Gendron is a case study in how the United States looks past this problem. How so? Because, as with Nicholas Cruz, the Parkland, Florida mass murderer, quote, signals were missed.
When he was at Susquehanna High School in Conklin, his post-graduation project was murder and suicide. So the state police did respond. He was taken to a facility. I'm not sure if it was a mental health facility, but he spent a day and a half there.
Signals aren't missed. They are ignored because there is no pragmatic understanding of what to do with the signals of mental illness.
In almost all the cases that have occurred in the last decade or so, including the most recent with Nicholas Cruz, there were warning signs long before it ever got to the point that they were going to commit some kind of atrocity. But people sat by and either didn't do enough or felt they couldn't impose constraints on somebody's individual freedoms.
Note today how the official interpretation of the Buffalo shooting is overwhelmingly political.
Domestic terrorism, violence inflicted in the service of hate, and the vicious thirst for power that defines one group of people being inherently inferior to any other group.
Recrimination puts us in our comfort zone, fighting each other with words while the reality of Peyton Gendron's severe mental disturbance fades until next time. But this film's focus is not the psychotic young males whose outlet is killing. It is the slowly building crisis of poorly treated mental illness, anxiety, and depression that's cresting just as the pandemic ends.
When we closed businesses during the pandemic, schools, clinics, churches, people sunk into a very, very dark place. And sadly, political science overtook medical science and heavily exacerbated what was already a bad mental health crisis. Suicide attempts among girls aged 12 to 17 rose more than 50%.
It's well known that many spent the pandemic doing too much alcohol and drugs. And only this week, the Wall Street Journal described the rising incidence of young adults with drug addiction or mental problems who are moving back home to be with their parents.
In the state of Missouri, we suffered over 2,000 overdose deaths, while our nation suffered over 100,000 overdose deaths. This made 2021 the deadliest overdose year for any country ever in history.
Today, the mentally ill homeless pile up in cities across California and New York, where mayors such as New York's Eric Adams dismantle makeshift camps. The problem is they have nowhere to go.
He came in office because he promised he'd clean the subways out and keep the homeless off the street. It's impossible.
Absent getting prescribed medical treatment, some of the most severely ill self-medicate on the streets with alcohol or drugs, and then turn violent.
Now there are homeless gangs that are attacking other homeless people.
And the younger ones, they don't care about anyone but self. All they want is to get high, to rob, to kill.
The U.S. has arrived at a moment of reckoning for a policy failure that has run like an open hydrant since the deinstitutionalization movement of the 1970s emptied the mental hospitals. The solution was supposed to be outpatient community care. It never happened.
One of the most difficult points in the entire process, highlighted by our patients themselves, is how hard it is to find help, how difficult it is. One of our patients shared, and this is a direct quote, "So in my experience, I was not able to get help when I needed it, or when I asked for it, or when I begged for it."
Less than a year into COVID-19, it was clear the lockdowns and closures were wrecking mental health, especially among children.
I've seen a decent amount of self-harm thoughts with kids that they just feel completely overwhelmed. They just don't want to do it anymore.
Political officials ceded total control of pandemic policy to public health authorities.
At colleges, they really have a nasty mental health crisis. It's not made up. And the COVID restrictions have a lot to do with that. It's masking, the social distancing, the having to get tested twice a week.
Politics, science, and economics of mental health are difficult. If you want to do X, say compel treatment for psychosis, an organized resistance will try to stop you. So the politicians give up and invoke guns, racism, and the rest like they have in Buffalo.
The echoes of replacement theory and other racially motivated views are increasingly coming out into the open.
The incidence of mental disorder has become too pervasive to sweep under a rug as big as the entire United States. And while the default solution has been to let mom and dad pick up the pieces, it's not enough.